2024 Democratic candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s appeal is plummeting among Democratic voters and rising with Republicans. This is according to a recent Morning Consult poll. RFK Jr. enjoyed a 46% and 42% approval rating among Democratic and Republican voters, respectively, when he jumped into the race back in April. But currently, he's taking a nosedive among Democrats, 41% of whom reported disapproving of him. But his favorability climbed to a whopping 50% among GOP respondents.
Not all Republican voters are convinced, though. Former White House deputy chief in the Bush administration, Karl Rove, tore down RFK Jr. during an appearance on Fox News yesterday. Let's watch.
He's got lots of conspiracies. 2004 election was stolen as computers switched nearly 250,000 votes in Ohio from John Kerry to George Bush and thereby gave him the election. 5G is a mass surveillance tool, and the telecoms, the telephone companies, are in on it. CIA killed his uncle. Sirhan didn't kill his father. And he defends Russia in Ukraine. It's all Ukraine's fault that Russia invaded him and is killing its people. I mean, this guy's a nut.
Karl, despite all that, he's attracting 20% in a lot of polling. So his message on some of these issues are getting through, or at least cutting through for some in the electorate. Well, you dismiss that?
I disagree. Yeah, I think two things. One is his last name is Kennedy, and he's Robert Kennedy Jr. And second of all, Joe Biden is an incredibly weak candidate. I don't think people are supporting him because of these conspiracy theories. I think they're supporting him because of his name and because they want an alternative to Joe Biden.
In that same interview, Rove blasted GOP candidate Ron DeSantis for suggesting he would consider taking RFK Jr. to spearhead the CDC or the FDA, citing Kennedy's history promoting anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. So, to me, I think Karl Rove, with the whiteboard, with a list of the conspiracy theories, makes him seem like more of a crazy guy than someone saying the things that he put on that whiteboard.
It's giving It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But one of the conspiracy theories on that list that caught my eye is CIA killed his uncle.
Right.
I would think that out of pretty much anybody in the world right now, RFK Jr. probably has the best handle on what happened to his own family members. And that is not some outrageous conspiracy theory that nobody believes. I mean, even back in the 70s investigation of this, a House report found credible evidence that there were probably 2 gunmen who fired at the president, that there was probably a conspiracy, although they didn't determine what exactly it was. RFK Jr. has spoken about the fact that the military complex wanted JFK to get involved in certain wars that he wasn't interested in, particularly in Vietnam. So putting that on the whiteboard next to everything else he was citing, as well as the things that he said about his own father's death, RFK's death, how is Karl Rove more qualified than RFK Jr. to say anything about the truth behind the deaths of these 2 men?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. A lot of the other stuff on that whiteboard taken entirely out of context. The 5G thing. A lot of people like to call, RFK Jr. an anti-vaccine guy, and he's clarified these things so many times. What he means when he says things about the vaccine, what he means when he says things about COVID. The 5G thing, I don't even think I've seen a clip of RFK Jr. talking about 5G. I think if he was a 5G conspiracy theorist, we would have more clips of that. But he could be right. Karl Rove could be right that there's some hot takes about 5G out there. But I think at the end of the day, when you have a candidate like RFK Jr., who's talking about issues with more substance than a lot of the candidates, who are speaking in platitudes, who are promising things that really have nothing to do with policies they could pass once they're in public office, I think it makes RFK Jr. have this unique space in the political field where it's like there's so much to attack him on, and the media very clearly wants to attack him because he's an anti-establishment candidate. Let's be very clear about that. The falling in the polls among Democrats and the rising in the polls among, Republicans is interesting to me for someone like RFK Jr. I think the media can take some credit for that, if I'm being honest.
100%.
And all of their criticism of him is not entirely true. That's a dangerous place for American democracy.
Yeah, I think the media is definitely to blame for this falling among Democrats, especially members of the Democratic establishment are more likely to trust mainstream media. Republicans, particularly base Republicans, are more likely to reflexively oppose anything the media says is bad. So you've seen over the past few weeks, especially after his appearance at that congressional committee about censorship, where he defended some of the comments that he had made regarding COVID-19, the media took everything he said out of context. They deliberately accused him of contradicting himself multiple times. I mean, we talked on this show about Dana Bash's segment on CNN where she accused him of lying. That's the kind of thing that unfortunately does move certain members of the Democratic Party. Now, on the Karl Rove question, as much as I despise Karl Rove for many things, he is a strategic guy. And so him going on there and having this whiteboard and talking about these issues, I think there's one of two things that he's trying to do. He's either trying to stave off GOP support for RFK Jr., which seems kind of unlikely, because we know that Karl Rove does not speak for the Republican base. He speaks to donors, and the donor class is obviously not supporting RFK Jr. So I think the more likely explanation is that Karl Rove knows that he's hated by Democrats, and so by him attacking RFK Jr., maybe he could sort of gin up that internal strife in the Democratic Party, convince some of those people who have been turned off by CNN and MSNBC to again back RFK Jr. and find him with a higher approval rating. At least that's my best guess.
It can't be overstated that Karl Rove is a strategic guy. At the age of 22, he was writing full strategies for the Republicans in the primaries and sending the memo to someone close to Richard Nixon. At 22, he was writing a primary strategy for a political party. This is a guy who's very calculated, and I don't know if he's as calculated as he used to be, because then maybe he wouldn't be on the television with a whiteboard of conspiracy theories listed. But I will say that it's obvious what his intention is, and it's to slander this guy who's an anti-establishment candidate. Obviously, Karl Rove has been in bed with the establishment since 22, since his genesis of his political career. That is shocking, just as a decision from a human perspective, but from a political perspective to, denounce Ron DeSantis and frame RFK Jr. as a raging conspiracy theorist, but not say a word about Donald Trump's conspiracies in the same sentence at all. He's someone who has thrown out conspiracies before. He's a funny guy. He doesn't mean everything he says, but he said some ridiculous things, perhaps more ridiculous than RFK Jr. So it's clear to me that the Republicans haven't dismissed Donald Trump winning the primary nomination and the presidency again. It's clear that Karl Rove is going on television and bashing DeSantis and bashing RFK Jr. in favor of, it seems, Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Karl Rove is still a party guy, right? He's going to support whoever the nominee is. And right now, all of the polls suggest that Trump is going to be the nominee. There's a new poll that just came out with Ohio primary numbers. Trump is leading by something like 50 percentage points, ahead of, actually in second place, Vivek Ramaswamy. But it's 100% correct. Karl Rove does not like anti-establishment candidates. If he had his pick of the litter, he would not be choosing Donald Trump or RFK Jr. or any of these guys. He is a neocon. He was deeply involved in the decision to get involved in the Iraq War and weapons of mass destruction. And recently, he was apparently calling up Republican donors, urging them to pull support away from J.D. Vance's Senate campaign in Ohio. J.D. Vance has spoken about that pretty openly. Tucker Carlson has done a number of great segments talking about Karl Rove's support for establishment candidates that toe a certain party line against more populist candidates. So it's not surprising to me that he would be going on TV bashing RFK Jr. And I think we just have to sort of suss out what is the underlying agenda as well. We know that he doesn't like anti-establishment candidates. What angle is he taking here in order to make sure that the Republican Party ultimately is successful, right? Is it more of a Democratic discord campaign, or is it trying to convince Republican voters that RFK bad, don't support him?
Yeah, it seems to me that the media, by bashing RFK Jr., bashing DeSantis, not a terribly huge fan of Trump, but really pushing out people like Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr., candidates that would pose a pretty substantive third-party challenge. Plus, seeing how someone like RFK Jr. is growing in the polls among Republicans suggests that if he doesn't get on the ballot for the primary election, which we see Progressive Turnout Project pushing so that he is not on the primary ballot with Democrats, you're creating the conditions for him to run as a third-party candidate, which would be probably worse for the establishment than even if he won the Democratic nomination.
Yeah, and there's also sort of a 50-50 shot on whether or not RFK Jr. running as a third-party candidate would hurt Republicans or Democrats more, because yes, he has a higher approval rating with Republicans right now, but we've also seen in prior polls that Democrats are more apt to vote third party as opposed to supporting Biden. So I think it's kind of a wash as to which party he would ultimately be a spoiler for.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to have to leave that there, but we've got more Rising just after this.